The cage wasn't locked, but he never left. They said he was too far gone, aggressive, unsalvageable. But when Ellie looked at him, she didn't see a lost cause. She saw a dog who had never been given a reason to stay. This is the story of Bran, a dog who forgot what it meant to be safe, and the woman who taught him day by day that love doesn't push, it waits. In a world that gave up on him, Bran didn't need a miracle. He needed someone who didn't walk away. The metal doors of the transport crate slammed shut with a finality that echoed down the hall like judgment. Bran didn't flinch. Not anymore. His eyes, once bright and sharp, trained to track movement, scan perimeters, find the unfindable now, stared blankly at the scratched steel walls around him. They used to call him Sergeant Bran, a name that once carried weight, authority, pride. Now it was just a label they no longer said out loud. He was no longer a partner, no longer a hero, just cargo. The handlers didn't speak to him as they wheeled the crate toward the rear loading bay. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor of the base's K-9 division, where walls were once lined with photographs of dogs like Bran, muzzles high, badges gleaming, partners grinning beside them. There was even a photo of Bran on that wall once, his tongue hanging out in victory after a drug bust. Now that frame had already been replaced with a newer face. He didn't understand what had gone wrong, not fully. Only that something had happened, and after that day, everything changed. The memory played over and over in his sleep like a looped reel of film. The alley, the flash, the scream, the silence. It had started like any other operation. They were tracking a suspect believed to be armed and volatile, some abandoned factory complex outside the city. Bran was deployed alongside Officer Grant, his handler of 3 years. Grant had always spoken to Bran like he was a brother, not a tool. They trained together, deployed together, even shared the same cot after long missions. There was never a moment Bran doubted him or himself. But that night, something shifted. A sound loud, sharp reverberated through the crumbling corridor. Bran paused mid-run, ears alert, frozen. He couldn't tell if it was a ricochet or a trap. For 1 second he hesitated. It was all it took. The blast came from the left. Smoke, shrapnel, screams, and then blood. Bran had launched forward too late. Grant was down. Bran's own flank had been grazed by the explosion, but it wasn't the physical pain that stuck. It was the way Grant looked at him as he bled out. Not with blame, but with confusion. As if he didn't understand why Bran hadn't been there first. Neither did Bran. 2 days later, still limping, Bran was taken from the medical wing to a cold, unlit holding cell. The voices of the humans he knew were quiet now, avoidant. Conversation shifted when he entered the room. "He froze," someone had whispered. "A K-9 can't freeze." "He hesitated," another said. "Could have cost us more lives." Then came the file. Reactive, unreliable under pressure. Retirement recommended. He had been loyal. He had given everything. And still, the badge was taken off his collar without ceremony. The next morning, he was sedated. When he woke up, the scent of home, of Grant, of the team, of his old life was gone. In its place was bleach, metal, rubber gloves. A vet tech sighing as they tagged his collar. "Asset number 9137 decommissioned." They didn't even call him by name. The auction facility was colder than the crate. Bran didn't know the place, but his instincts screamed. The air was stale with dread-padded floors, loud ventilation, the scent of fear from dozens of animals too afraid to bark. Some were young, some were sick. All were waiting for something to happen. Most didn't know what. Bran lay curled in the far corner of his kennel, his head tucked under a paw, his tail limp against the bars. Occasionally, someone walked past. Sometimes they stopped to look. One man tapped the bars and laughed. "This one's got scars, probably cheap." Another read the tag and snorted. "Was a cop dog, huh? Probably broken." Bran didn't lift his head. He didn't growl. He no longer responded to tone, sound, or movement. Even his breathing was shallow measured. It was safer to disappear. Late afternoon, a man with a thick coat and reeking of tobacco stopped and lingered longer than the others. His boots were cracked and his voice rough as gravel. "Yeah, you'll do." Money exchanged hands. Bran was led, not with a leash but with a catchpole, into a rusted pickup truck. The man said nothing to him. Not "good boy," not even a grunt. Just the sound of tires crunching gravel as they pulled away from the auction yard. Behind them, the sun dipped behind chain-link fences and metal crates, and no one looked back. Bran didn't either. That night, as the truck pulled off a dirt road into what looked like an overgrown field of sheds, Bran felt his first tremor of instinctual fear return. Not fear of attack, he had faced that before, but fear of erasure. The man threw open the tailgate and hauled Bran roughly into a cage beside several others. The smell of rot clung to the walls. Feces, old blood. Bran was too tired to resist. He limped into the corner and lay down. The door clanged shut. No blanket, no water bowl, no name. Just steel, just shadows. And in the darkness, Bran, former K-9, decorated officer, hero of 3 major operations, finally accepted that no one was coming back for him. The cage was barely wide enough for him to turn around. Rust flaked from the bars like old skin, and every time Bran shifted his weight, the metal groaned beneath him. No roof, no insulation, just wire mesh and dirt, hardened into stone from years of neglect. Above him, the sky hung gray and indifferent, and the wind cut through the clearing like it had forgotten what mercy was. This was the backlot of the breeder's compound, a hidden stretch of land behind the main house, shielded by rotting plywood fences and the stink of ammonia. The newer dogs, the ones he actually planned to sell, were kept up front in covered pens. Bran asset number 9137 was thrown in the back, forgotten like a broken tool that no longer served its purpose. His body was sore from the ride. His hip, still not healed from the blast, ached every time he shifted, but worse than the pain was the weight of nothingness. No handler, no commands, no name, just a cage, just time. The first week, Bran barked, not loudly, just short, hoarse bursts into the wind, maybe out of habit. Maybe some distant part of him still thought someone might hear, might come back. His voice cracked by the second day, rasping into silence. The man, the breeder, would throw a boot at the cage whenever he barked. "Shut it," he'd grumble. "Stupid mutt." Bran learned quickly. He stopped barking. He stopped trying. He stopped making noise altogether. Silence became his armor. The days blurred together like mud in the rain. Food came irregularly. A dented tin pan pushed under the cage once every day or two, filled with something cold and metallic-smelling, sometimes just dry kibble soaked in dishwater. Other times, nothing. Bran never growled when another dog barked near his food. He didn't guard it, didn't care. He ate because his body demanded it, not because he wanted to. Water came from a hose sprayed once across the cages, more onto the dirt than into the bowls. On hot days, Bran would lick the puddles off the corners of the cage floor, tongue moving slowly, without urgency. He used to be muscle, sharp angles, trained for endurance. Now, his ribs pressed sharply against his skin. His coat dulled into patches of dirt-caked fur, matted around old wounds and unwashed grime. The once proud frame of a working dog faded into something gaunt and quiet. Even the other dogs knew not to come near. Something about Bran unsettled them. Maybe it was the scars. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the smell of something that used to be powerful, now hollow. One night a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, snapping branches and driving rain sideways. Bran didn't lift his head. Lightning cracked above the tree line. He didn't flinch. Thunder roared. His eyes didn't move. Rain pooled beneath him until the dirt turned to mud. He sat in it like stone. Because what's the point of reacting when no one is watching? What's the point of being afraid when fear has become your only constant? At some point, he didn't know when it stopped hurting to be alone. It just became normal. The breeders stopped checking on him altogether. Months passed. Bran's toenails curled in on themselves. The fur on his ears thinned. He began to sleep longer, move slower. His world became no larger than the 4 rusting walls of the cage and the small patch of sky he could see when the clouds parted. And still, he made no sound. Once, a child wandered too far behind the property. She peeked between the broken boards and saw Bran lying in the mud. "Mom!" she shouted. "There's a dog back here!" Bran didn't lift his head. He didn't dare. The breeder came stomping out, shouting, yanking the girl away by the arm. "Don't look at that one," he barked. "He's no good." And so the world moved on. The grass grew taller around the cages. The other dogs came and went, bought, sold, replaced. Bran remained, not fierce enough to fight, not soft enough to be wanted, just left over, forgotten. But deep in some dusty part of him, buried beneath muscle memory and command cues long unspoken, there was still a flicker, not a bark, not a growl, just a flicker, a memory, of someone kneeling beside him, a hand resting gently on his chest, the sound of a voice, soft, firm. "Bran, find." And the way his tail used to wag, not out of excitement but purpose. He didn't know why the memory came then, in the dark, beneath the weight of rust and bone. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was just the ache of remembering what it felt like to matter. But for a heartbeat, it was there. And then it was gone, replaced by sleep. Morning came with a distant siren wailing somewhere past the tree line. Bran didn't stir. He didn't know that in 48 hours everything would change, that steel doors would be kicked in, that a woman named Ellie would kneel beside his cage and not look away, that someone would finally see him not as scrap, but as someone still worth saving. At 5:47 a.m., just as the first haze of morning tried to break through the low clouds, a convoy of county animal control trucks pulled off the main road and disappeared down a gravel path no one was meant to find. The reports had been building for weeks. Neighbors complaining of barking late into the night, a foul stench rolling in with the wind, unregistered litters being sold in unmarked vans. But it wasn't until a delivery driver caught sight of stacked crates behind a rotting shed that someone finally said the words out loud. Illegal operation, possibly dozens of dogs. As the team moved in, boots crunching wet dirt, they passed rusted-out trailers and scattered piles of bones that weren't supposed to be there. A sharp whistle from the lead officer signaled their split half moved toward the rear barns, the others headed to the kennels. Then came the barking. Louder now. Desperate. Screaming, almost. What they found behind the main fence was worse than any of them expected. Wire cages stacked 2 and 3 high, feces smeared against concrete, bowls filled with algae, puppies with ribs like shadows under skin. One pit bull chained to a tree, its collar embedded in flesh. None of the team said a word. They'd seen hell before, but never this concentrated. Among the chaos, tucked farthest back where the grass grew tall and the air stank of rust and rot, stood a single cage almost covered by a warped blue tarp. The bolts on the door had fused to the frame from years of rain. One officer hesitated. "I think something's still in here." She pushed back the tarp and froze. Inside, a dog lay curled in the far corner, still as death, caked in mud, fur missing in patches. Not growling, not barking, not even lifting his head, but breathing, barely. She stepped forward, crouching low, her voice gentle but unsure. "Hey, boy, you with me?" The dog flinched, not from her tone, but from the fact she spoke at all, as if the sound itself was foreign. Bran didn't move. The smell of latex gloves, the metallic click of the bolt cutter, the shape of a woman's shadow cast across the bars. None of it registered as safety. His body had learned this drill long ago. Stillness is survival. If you don't react, they lose interest. If you don't make a sound, they leave. So, he didn't move. Didn't lift his head, didn't blink, until the door opened. And air-fresh, unfiltered touched his skin for the first time in months. The woman didn't reach for him. Instead, she just knelt there watching, her eyes filled with something Bran didn't understand. Sadness? Pity? No. Something quieter, something softer, compassion. "Come on, big guy," she whispered, setting a folded towel at the edge of the cage. "Let's get you out of here." Another rescuer approached from behind. "That the shepherd they logged?" She nodded. "Barely alive." "Is he aggressive?" "No, he's—" She looked at Bran again, her voice catching. "He's not even here." It took both of them, gently, patiently, to coax him out. Not with a leash, not with treats, but with time. They didn't drag, they didn't lift, they waited. And finally, slowly, Bran stood, or tried to. His legs shook under his own weight. His paws slid across the slick floor of the cage. One step, then another, and he nearly collapsed. But he didn't growl, didn't resist. The moment he crossed the threshold, the rescuer exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. They guided him to the van, laying him on soft blankets, wrapping him in warmth. Someone handed over a clipboard, and she scribbled, "Large male, German shepherd, severe malnutrition, no microchip, full shutdown behavior." Under status, she paused, then wrote, "High trauma, not adoptable yet." The ride to the shelter was quiet. The other dogs rescued that morning whined and barked from their kennels in the back, their cries echoing through the van. But Bran lay still, head down, eyes open but unseeing. The rescuer rode with him, seated beside the crate, her fingers resting just outside the bars. She didn't speak. She didn't try to touch him. But every few minutes she would glance at him and whisper, not a command, not a question, just a simple presence. "You're safe now." Bran didn't believe her, not yet. But something in his eyes flickered. Not hope, not trust. Just the smallest shift. Recognition. When they reached the shelter, they carried him in through the side entrance away from the noise, away from the main kennels. He was placed in an isolated recovery run, padded with towels and soft blankets, a fresh bowl of water, some chicken broth. A sign on the gate read, "Bran, retired K9, handle with silence. Let him come to you." The vet checked him over that afternoon. Old injuries, hip trauma, scar tissue on his ribs, ear damage, probably used to explosions, maybe military or SWAT. Michael Turner, the shelter director, read the intake form and sighed. "These dogs break differently," he said quietly. "They don't just survive pain, they internalize it." He glanced back at the enclosure. Bran hadn't moved, eyes open, staring at the wall. That night, as the lights dimmed and the hallway grew quiet, Bran finally stirred. Just once. His nose lifted slightly, sniffed, clean air, blankets, water, no yelling, no cage, just silence. But this silence was different. Not punishment, not abandonment. Just peace. It unsettled him more than fear ever did. Tomorrow someone new would walk past his gate, a woman with quiet steps and patient eyes. She wouldn't speak right away. She wouldn't reach for him. She would just sit and wait. And that would be the moment, without him knowing, that everything would begin to change. The morning air still held its winter bite as Ellie Harper pulled into the gravel lot behind Hope Shelter. The engine of her old sedan coughed once before settling into silence. She sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing in the familiar stillness that always seemed to hover around this place. It wasn't glamorous, volunteering here, but it was necessary. Most mornings followed a quiet rhythm: check the feed charts, walk the regulars, coax the anxious ones out of their corners with soft words and liver treats. Sometimes a dog would surprise her with a tail wag. Sometimes they just lay there, eyes glazed over, waiting for a world that never called their name again. Ellie had learned long ago that not every dog wanted to be saved, but that didn't mean she stopped trying. She pushed open the shelter's back door, the bell above jingling softly. The familiar scent of bleach and old kibble greeted her like a handshake, sterile, but not unwelcome. In the hallway, clipboards hung neatly on their hooks. Volunteers moved quietly between rooms, exchanging nods and tired smiles. Michael Turner, the shelter director, was already pacing with a coffee mug that had seen better days. When he spotted her, he waved her over. "Ellie," he called, "glad you're early. I need a favor." She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas tote and walked over. "Sure. What's up?" Michael hesitated. He rubbed the back of his neck like the words weighed more than usual. "We've got a new intake. Came in late yesterday from that raid in Coldridge County." Ellie blinked. "The breeder case?" He nodded grimly. "It's bad. A lot of the dogs are sick, malnourished, scared. But there's one." He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. Ellie frowned. "One what?" Michael took a slow sip of coffee, then gestured down the hall. "Come see for yourself." They walked past rows of kennels where some dogs barked, others whined, and a few paced nervously back and forth like prisoners counting steps. Ellie glanced down at her clipboard, then back up at Michael. "Where is he?" "Isolation ward, end of the corridor." That caught her attention. Isolation was usually reserved for biters, escape risks, or those on medical hold. Michael didn't explain further. When they reached the last door, he paused with his hand on the knob. "Just be prepared." He's not like the others." Ellie offered a half smile. "None of them are." Michael didn't smile back. The door creaked open, and the world on the other side was hushed. No barking, no scratching, just a strange, suspended stillness. Ellie stepped inside and saw him. In the farthest corner of the enclosure, huddled so tight against the wall he looked like part of the shadows, was a large German shepherd, underweight, filthy, scarred, his head tucked low, ribs sharp under a thinning coat. His body shook not in short bursts of fear, but a continuous full-body tremble like something deep inside had cracked and never stopped breaking. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He was just trying to disappear. Ellie's breath caught in her chest. "God," she whispered. Michael's voice was low. "Hasn't eaten. Barely drinks. No eye contact. Won't move from that spot." Ellie took a step closer to the glass. Her eyes scanned his body, hip bones jutting out, a pink scar trailing up his flank, ears half folded, tail wrapped tight under him. He didn't lift his head, didn't react at all. She crouched slowly, resting her hands on her knees. "What's his name?" Michael shook his head. "No chip, no collar, no history. But we found an old tag in the records from the auction. Bran." The name felt heavy in her mouth. "Bran," she repeated, as if trying it on for the first time. Michael stared through the glass, his expression unreadable. "Used to be K9. Probably military or tactical law enforcement. You can see it in how he holds his body. But he's gone now, shut down, like whatever was in him just isn't anymore." Ellie didn't respond. She couldn't take her eyes off Bran. There was something unbearable about the way he didn't look at her. Like he'd learned that hope was more painful than hunger, like trust was something that had cost him too much. "I want to work with him," she said quietly. Michael blinked. "What?" "I want to be assigned to his care, feeding, socialization, even if he won't engage. I'll log the time." "Ellie, he won't even look at us. I've seen shut-down dogs before, but this—" "I know," Michael sighed. "He's marked high trauma, not adoptable." "Then I'll be patient." He rubbed his forehead, hesitating. "I've got a dozen dogs waiting for basic behavior assessment. I can't waste volunteer hours on a lost cause." "He's not a lost cause," Ellie said softly, eyes still fixed on the trembling form. "He's just waiting for someone to not give up." A long pause. Then Michael sighed again, more tired than annoyed. "You're stubborn." She gave the faintest smile. "That's why I'm good at this." As he left her alone in the ward, Ellie slowly lowered herself onto the cold tile floor just outside Bran's enclosure. She didn't speak, didn't tap the glass, didn't coo like so many others had tried. She just sat, legs crossed, back straight, hands resting gently in her lap, and waited. Bran didn't move, didn't twitch. But his breathing, barely perceptible, paused for just a second. Somewhere inside the silence, he knew she was there. And for Ellie Harper, that was enough. By the second morning, Bran still hadn't moved, not from his corner, not from his posture, not from the shell he'd buried himself in. And Ellie Harper hadn't moved either. She sat just outside his kennel, legs crossed on the cold tile, the same way she had the day before. No clipboard, no commands, no distractions. Just her presence, quiet, steady, undemanding. The hallway behind her echoed with the usual rhythm of shelter life. Dogs barking, metal bowls clanging, volunteers calling out names in cheerful tones, trying to coax wagging tails from behind metal gates. But not here. Here it was different. Here silence was not empty. Here silence meant respect. Another staff member passed by and shook her head. "You know, he probably doesn't even know you're there." Ellie didn't look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on Bran's still form curled so tight into himself, it was hard to distinguish where body ended and fear began. "I think he does," she said quietly. The woman snorted. "You're wasting your shift, just saying." But Ellie didn't answer, because Bran was listening. Not with his ears, not with any part of him that people could measure, but something deeper. Somewhere inside, he knew. The day before, when she'd first sat down, Michael had raised an eyebrow. "You gonna try treats?" he asked. "No." "Clicker training?" "No." "Music therapy? Calming chews?" Ellie shook her head. No words, no expectations, no touching. Michael stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "So, what are you doing then?" She looked at him and said the one thing no one else had thought to say. "I'm showing him I'm not going anywhere." By mid-morning, a few of the other volunteers had wandered in to check out the new intake. They tried like people always do. One young girl knelt and offered pieces of jerky through the bars. Bran didn't flinch. Another tried soft, coaxing whispers. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now. Come on, sweetheart." Her voice cracked with pity. Bran didn't even twitch. A man, well-meaning but too loud, clapped his hands gently, crouching. "Hey, you remember this sound? Come on, soldier, wake up." Bran's breathing changed, slightly, shallow and fast. Ellie looked up sharply. "Back off." The man blinked. "What?" "You're overwhelming him." He doesn't need anything from you right now," she said, calm but firm. Not noise, not pity, just space. There was silence. Then they left, and Ellie returned to stillness. Hours passed. Bran didn't move, but Ellie saw it. The faintest flicker of his ear, a shift in his breathing when she shifted her weight. Not fear, just awareness. It was the first sign of presence of something behind those still, haunted eyes that she'd been waiting for. She let her body relax again, grounding herself, letting the room fall away, letting the weight of her patience speak louder than any word ever could. Michael appeared again around lunch. "You haven't moved," he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Ellie didn't respond. "You know, if I clocked every hour people sat with shut-down dogs, I could line the hallway with heartbreak." Still nothing. "I get it," he sighed. "You want to be the one that reaches him. Everyone does at first." Ellie finally turned to look at him. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I don't need him to reach back." Michael tilted his head. "I just need him to know I'm not like the others." She stayed through the afternoon, refused breaks, only stood once to stretch, then returned to her spot. She didn't try to force eye contact. She didn't offer food. She didn't speak his name. She simply matched his silence. And in doing so, she honored it. Because sometimes the loudest love is the one that doesn't make a sound. Near the end of the day, when the lights in the hallway dimmed to their late afternoon hue, Ellie thought she saw it, a subtle shift. Bran's eyes, sunken and tired, moved. Not much, but they moved. just slightly, toward her, for less than a second, then away again. Her breath caught, but she didn't smile, didn't speak, just allowed herself the smallest inhale of hope. Michael returned one last time before the end of shift. "You gonna do this again tomorrow?" he asked, folding his arms. Ellie stood slowly, her legs stiff. She winced as her knees popped. She turned to him and nodded. "Yes." He gave a small shake of the head, somewhere between impressed and unconvinced. "Stubborn," he muttered. Ellie offered a tired half-smile as she stretched. "I've been called worse." As she left, Bran remained motionless. But for the first time, as the door clicked shut behind her, his ears didn't flatten completely. They stayed, slightly raised, like the ghost of a question had stirred in the dark. And tomorrow she would answer it again with silence. The minutes bled into hours. Outside, the wind had shifted. Long shadows from the shelter's side windows crawled their way up the far wall. Somewhere in the background, a volunteer laughed too loudly, a puppy yipped, and the metal clatter of bowls being washed rang out like tin bells in a church that Bran no longer prayed in. But inside the isolation ward, the silence remained. Ellie was still there, exactly where she had been since morning, legs folded beneath her, spine upright but soft, arms resting gently on her knees. She hadn't said a word in almost 3 hours. She didn't need to. Because this moment wasn't about teaching Bran anything. It was about unlearning. She had watched countless dogs come through this place. Some arrived angry, some broken, some practically vibrating with fear. They paced, they barked, they lashed out, or curled so small it seemed they wanted to disappear into the cracks of the floor. But Bran was different. He wasn't hiding because he was afraid of people. He was hiding because he had already been used up by them. A faint rattle of the air vent stirred the dust above his kennel. Bran remained in the same position, curled tightly, ribs sharp against thinning fur, one paw half tucked under his jaw. He hadn't moved all day, not once. Not for the food placed gently in the corner earlier, not for the water bowl, not for the occasional sound of another dog barking 2 doors down. Stillness had become his only defense. Ellie watched the rhythm of his breathing, slow and shallow, barely enough to fog the glass near his muzzle. She felt her chest tighten again, not from frustration, from grief. The kind you feel when looking at something beautiful that doesn't believe in its own worth anymore. But then something happened. Tiny, fragile, so small that anyone else might have missed it. His right ear twitched. Just once. It wasn't random, it wasn't a spasm, it wasn't sleep. It twitched in her direction. Ellie didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't lean forward like so many others would have. Instead, she let the silence remain sacred. Her breath evened, her muscles softened again. Another 10 minutes passed. Then Bran's paw shifted. Not far, barely an inch, but enough that it made a soft, dragging sound across the kennel floor. Ellie heard it. And still, she didn't speak. She didn't need to, because this was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment he noticed her. The moment he really knew that she hadn't left, that her presence wasn't a mistake or a transaction or a setup for disappointment, that she had been here every day, saying nothing, and still coming back. And for a dog like Bran, broken not by one single trauma, but by the slow erosion of trust over years, that flicker of recognition was monumental. Then it happened again, a second shift. This time, his nose moved just slightly, sniffing the air between them. No eye contact, no movement toward her. But Ellie's heart jumped in her chest all the same, because this wasn't reaction. It was choice. He had chosen to notice. He had chosen to acknowledge her. And in a place like this, where so many dogs had forgotten how to choose anything at all that meant something. No, that meant everything. Michael walked in a few minutes later, flipping through a clipboard and glancing over the top of his reading glasses. Anything new? Ellie didn't look up. Her voice was almost a whisper. He moved. Michael raised a brow. He moved? His ear, then his paw. He sniffed the air. Michael gave a half-sigh, half-chuckle. You're gonna count ear twitches as progress now? Ellie finally turned toward him. Yes. And she meant it. Because Bran hadn't flinched. He hadn't retreated into the corner like before. He hadn't shut his eyes or tried to fold into himself the way trauma had taught him to. No, this time he stayed, still curled, still guarded, but aware, present, and not afraid of her presence. That was progress. As the last light of day began to fade from the windows above, Ellie stayed a little longer. She didn't try to force more out of him. She didn't push for a second glance or hope for some miracle tail wag. She simply stayed quiet, warm, steady, a witness, a promise. And as the shelter lights dimmed into evening mode and Bran's eyes began to close, not in shutdown but in sleep, Ellie whispered one thing. Not for him to obey, but for him to hear. You're not alone. And this time, his ear didn't twitch. It settled. The morning was colder than usual, not biting, not brutal, just the kind of chill that seeped into your sleeves and made you feel smaller than you were. Ellie Harper pulled into the gravel lot of Hope Shelter and sat for a moment in the stillness, her breath fogging the windshield. She reached into the pocket of her coat and closed her fingers around a folded paper towel. Still warm, still fragrant. Cooked chicken, skinless, no seasoning, the kind that wasn't on any training list, but sometimes, with dogs like Bran, that wasn't the point. This wasn't about reward. It was about invitation. She moved through the shelter hall like a shadow, unnoticed by most. The other volunteers were busy prepping breakfast rounds, leashing the eager, high-energy rescues for their first walks. Someone had already turned on the playlist in the main kennel, old jazz, drifting through tinny speakers like smoke. But Ellie didn't stop. She didn't say hello. Her mind was already down the isolation hall, already on the quietest room, already on the form that hadn't moved in days but had twitched, had glanced, had breathed her name in silence. Bran hadn't changed position much. Still tucked into the farthest corner of the enclosure, still coiled in on himself like something bracing for impact. But this morning, Ellie noticed something different. His head was slightly raised, just slightly, enough to see her when she entered, enough to know. She didn't speak, didn't say good morning or I brought you something. She simply sat, same place, same posture, same distance. Then, slowly, she reached into her coat pocket. The rustle of the paper towel made Bran's ear twitch. Good. Not panic, not retreat, just notice. She unfolded the towel carefully, using both hands, letting the smell waft gently through the air without tossing it, without presentation. This wasn't a trick. It wasn't bait. It was a gesture. She took a small piece of the chicken soft, still warm, and placed it on the floor, a few feet from his gate. Not close enough to threaten him, not far enough to ignore, right in the middle of their silent space. Then she leaned back again, hands on her knees, eyes soft, and waited. The seconds passed like snow melting on concrete, quiet, invisible, slow. Bran didn't move, not at first. His eyes flicked once to the food, then away, then back again. But his body didn't follow. His legs remained tucked, his tail pressed so tightly beneath him it barely looked like a tail at all. His breathing was even shallow, but not panicked. Ellie knew better than to hope for more just yet. So she sat and watched. Not him. His pause. Movement in trauma dogs didn't always start with the head or the body. It started in the toes, the way a muscle flexed. A claw shifted, a paw curled inward, then flattened again. Bran's front paw did that now, just barely. The left one. He adjusted it, repositioned it on the concrete, as if testing whether the world would punish him for even thinking of moving forward. Nothing happened. He didn't look at Ellie. She didn't look at him. The chicken remained on the floor, unbothered, uneaten, but present. A promise in protein. Hours passed. Ellie stayed. Volunteers walked by. Some paused, some whispered. Michael peeked in once, then shook his head like he didn't understand and didn't want to. Ellie didn't explain. Because this wasn't about progress that others could measure. This was about a language only Bran could speak, and she was still learning the grammar. By early afternoon, the sun shifted through the windows above the kennel, casting warm rectangles across the floor. Bran's gaze, distant and quiet, moved toward the light. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, his nose twitched. Not from panic, not from instinct, but from curiosity. A living part of him reached forward, even if the rest stayed frozen. He inched his nose an inch closer, then nothing. Ellie exhaled softly through her nose, trying not to let her hope show in the rise of her chest. Instead of watching his eyes, she looked at his paws again. They had shifted. Not much, just enough. Like a tree leaning ever so slightly toward the sun after months buried in shadow. At closing time, Ellie stood to leave. She moved carefully, no sudden gestures, no words of encouragement. The chicken was still there, untouched, but just as she turned toward the hallway, a sound. She paused, looked back, and saw it. The chicken was gone. The exact moment he had taken it, she didn't know. She had looked away. Maybe when the lights dimmed, maybe when the hallway grew still, maybe in the moments between breath and memory. But it was gone, and Bran had not returned to his corner. He remained where the food had been, not closer to her, but no longer hiding from her either. Ellie smiled, not with her lips, with her stillness. This wasn't victory. It wasn't even trust. But it was something real, something earned, something alive. Tomorrow, she would bring more. Not just food, but space, stillness, and the kind of silence that says, I see you, and I'm not leaving. The next morning, the clouds hung low over the shelter. Soft, quiet rain misted against the windows, painting the world in washed-out gray. But Ellie barely noticed. Her focus was already on the hallway at the back, the one few others entered unless they had to. She moved through the corridors like always quiet, intentional, unnoticed. In her coat pocket, another carefully wrapped piece of chicken rested. But this time, she wasn't sure if she would need it, because something had changed. Not something anyone else would see. But she felt it, like a current in the air before a storm breaks, like the hush right before a dog finally decides to step forward. When she turned the corner and reached Bran's kennel, she paused. He wasn't in the far corner. He was closer now, still not near the gate, but halfway. That alone made her stop breathing for a second. She exhaled slowly and took her seat on the floor. No sudden movement, no words, just presence. Bran's body was still tense, every muscle pulled taut like a string wound too tight. But he wasn't trembling like before. His ribs rose and fell in shallow rhythm, and his ears were no longer pinned back in defeat. They were listening. And then his nose lifted, just slightly, toward her. He sniffed the air once, then again, a subtle, careful inhale, then another. It wasn't the desperate, frantic sniffing of a dog searching for food. This was more cautious, measured, like he was decoding her. Ellie didn't move, didn't blink. Every part of her stilled, letting him have the silence, letting him lead. His paw shifted, a small sound claws scraping lightly against the concrete. He moved 1 inch forward, then stopped, frozen, as if his own movement startled him. Ellie kept her eyes soft, her posture unchanged. She looked down, not directly at him, but not away either. Open, safe. Another inch, then another. The space between them shrank, not by leaps, but by courage measured in heartbeats. He paused again. One of his hind legs shook, not from fear, from uncertainty. Bran was fighting his own instinct, one carved into him by years of punishment and silence. Every step forward was a betrayal of what he'd learned it took to survive. Never trust, never approach, never hope. But still, he moved. By the time he reached the area where the chicken had been the day before, Ellie could see the shallow tremble of his shoulders. His head remained low, eyes flicking between the ground and the invisible line he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. And then their eyes met. It was fast, fleeting. But in that instant, everything stilled. Not just the hallway, not just the breath in Ellie's chest, but him. Bran froze, eyes locked onto hers, not wide with fear, not dull with trauma. Alive, searching, wounded, but there. Ellie swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Her fingers curled lightly on her knees. Her voice was barely a whisper, but steady. I see you. No command. No coaxing. Just truth. And Bran didn't run. He didn't flinch. He held the eye contact for a second longer, then turned his gaze away. But he didn't retreat. He didn't curl back into himself. He simply stood there, in the middle of the space between them, as if unsure what to do next, as if waiting for something to hurt that never came. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Bran didn't react. Another test passed. Another brick loosened from the wall he had spent years building. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Then, slowly, Bran lowered his head toward the floor. Not in submission, not in fear, but in a gesture Ellie recognized immediately. He was grounding himself, trusting the moment, trusting that she wouldn't betray it. She remained there with him for another hour. No more progress, no more inches. But it didn't matter, because today was not about reward. It wasn't about the chicken, or the hand, or the command. It was about the look, the contact, the fragile thread of understanding spun silently in the air between them. When Ellie finally rose to leave, Bran lifted his head slightly, not in alarm, but in quiet acknowledgment. She paused by the door and offered a final whisper. "Tomorrow's another step." And for the first time since he arrived at Hope Shelter, Bran's tail gave the faintest twitch. Not a wag, not a swing, just life. Ellie arrived before sunrise. The air was damp with morning fog, curling around the fence posts like smoke that had forgotten how to rise. Crickets still hummed faintly in the distance. The shelter was quiet, too early for feeding rounds, too late for night stillness. But Bran was already awake. She knew it the moment she stepped into the hallway. He was waiting, not near the gate, not pacing. But he was up-sitting halfway between the far wall and the place where she always sat. No curled spine, no hidden eyes, just stillness. But this time, it didn't feel like withdrawal. It felt like consideration. Ellie moved to her spot without a word, lowered herself to the floor with practiced care, and waited. Bran didn't shrink back, didn't turn his body away. His breathing was slow, shallow, but no longer panicked. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a fresh piece of chicken, warm, soft, fragrant, and placed it gently in her open palm. Then she held her hand out between them. Open, still, trusting. Bran didn't move at first, but his ears shifted, his nose twitched. A slow, cautious inhale, then a pause, then a step. The moment his paw scraped forward, Ellie stilled her breath. Every part of her wanted to close the distance just a little, just enough to help him. But she didn't, because this was his moment, not hers. Bran lowered his head, inching forward with the weight of 1,000 ghosts clinging to his shoulders. His ribs still showed through his fur. His frame still bore the map of everything he'd endured. But he moved. Toward her. When his nose was just a few inches from her palm, he stopped, frozen. His body trembled not violently, but visibly. He was afraid. Not of her, but of what this meant. Because dogs like Bran didn't fear rejection. They feared hope. They feared the moment after the good thing, when it disappeared. Ellie didn't speak, didn't whisper encouragement. She simply kept her hand out. Let him decide. Let him own it. And then he took the food. Not in a rush, not in desperation, but gently, slowly. His teeth brushed her palm, light as breath. His nose lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then he stepped back, body still taut, muscles still braced. But he didn't flee. He just stood there, eyes lowered, waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing did. Ellie let her hand fall slowly to her lap, blinking back the sudden heat behind her eyes. And then it happened, so small she almost missed it. A movement at the very edge of his body, his tail. It twitched. Just once. Not a wag of joy, not a signal of play, just a flicker. A reflex born from a place deeper than language. Not celebration, not trust, but acknowledgement. And that, to Ellie, was everything. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears welled but didn't fall. Her chest ached with the weight of the moment. He had taken food from her hand, and he had let her see him, and then he had answered, not with words, not even with eyes, but with that single, sacred gesture, his tail moving just once like a memory waking up. Bran stepped back into his space, lowering himself slowly onto the blanket near the wall, not in retreat, not in fear, just resting. His body still faced her, his breathing steady, and for the first time since she met him, he exhaled audibly, soft, like something uncoiled inside him, like the smallest part of him believed for one breath that he was safe. Ellie stayed there for a while longer. No more chicken, No more reaching, just being, matching his stillness with her own. When she finally stood to leave, she didn't say goodbye, didn't say anything at all. But as she turned to go, she glanced back and saw him watching her, not with fear, not with hope, just presence. And for now, that was more than enough. The fourth morning came with a softness that didn't belong to shelters. No barking, no clanging metal, only the muffled hum of air vents and the steady beat of rain tapping the rooftop like fingertips on a closed piano. Ellie moved through the hallway without her usual bag, without chicken in her pocket, without any plan except to be there. Something inside her had shifted after yesterday, not because Bran had eaten from her hand, but because of what came after the tail twitch, a flicker, a thread, a quiet yes from a dog who'd said no to the world for too long. When she turned the corner to his enclosure, Bran was already at the gate, not pressed against it, not wagging, but there, waiting. His body still held tension, neck low, paws braced, muscles always ready to recoil, but his eyes, they weren't scanning past her like before. They were on her, fully, steady. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger to him. She felt recognized. She didn't speak. Instead, she lowered herself to the same spot as always. Cross-legged, open, soft. Bran didn't retreat. He stood still for a few seconds, as if confirming this wasn't a dream, then took one step toward her, then another. No chicken, no promise of food, no reward. Just her presence, her silence, her breath sinking slowly with his. When he was close enough, Ellie raised her hand flat and open between them. This time, he didn't sniff. He didn't hesitate. He moved forward, inch by inch, and pressed the side of his muzzle gently into her palm. Ellie's chest swelled with emotion so fast, so tight, she almost forgot to breathe. His fur was rough-coarse in places, bald in others, but warm, alive. His eyes fluttered closed as she let her fingers lightly trace the bridge of his snout. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He let her. And in that simple act, he offered more than trust. He offered surrender. Ellie whispered, "You're doing so good, Bran." He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. And the tone said, "I see you. I'm proud of you. And I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for minutes, a hand against a scarred face, a broken dog leaning into borrowed peace. And for once, there was no fear in the space between them, only stillness, only breath. Michael passed by the glass but didn't interrupt. He just stood for a second, blinking as if unsure what he was seeing. Then he walked away without a word. Later, as Bran lay down near the gate, not in his corner, not in retreat, Ellie stayed seated beside him. She watched his eyelids grow heavy, the way his back legs unfolded just slightly, relaxing, the way his ears no longer pressed back but tilted forward, listening, curious. She smiled. It was working. He was healing, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. But trauma doesn't leave in a straight line. It curves. It lingers. It waits behind sudden sounds and uninvited memories. And neither of them knew that the crack was coming. Soon. But for now, there was peace, and that was enough. The hallway was still quiet. Ellie had just finished brushing her fingers gently across Bran's snout again, a soft circle of contact neither of them took for granted. His head rested near her knee now, not touching, but close. Close enough for her to hear the steadiness in his breath. It was the calmest she'd ever seen him, and she, too, had begun to exhale. She didn't say it out loud, but she'd started to believe deep down that maybe they had crossed the threshold, that maybe they were on the other side of whatever haunted Bran's bones. And then the sound came, like a hammer against the past. A door slammed at the end of the hallway, hard, sharp, unannounced. A man's voice followed, loud, fast, barking something toward another staff member. Just noise, routine. But not for Bran. For Bran, it was everything. It was like watching a string snap inside him. 1 second he was still, the next gone. His body launched backward so fast he slipped, claws scrabbling against the concrete as he bolted into the farthest corner of the kennel. His tail tucked so tightly beneath him it might have disappeared. His whole frame pressed into the wall, trembling violently. His breath turned ragged, gasping, each inhale shorter than the last. Ellie froze. Not from confusion, but heartbreak. She knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't here anymore. He was back there, wherever there was. She slowly lowered herself back to the ground, not moving toward him, not speaking. But her eyes brimmed with tears she didn't let fall. Not yet. She watched as Bran pressed his head into the wall like he was trying to become part of it, trying to vanish. His flanks heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. His pupils had blown wide, glazed over. Every muscle screamed one word: survive. Michael's voice broke the moment like gravel underfoot. He'd come around the corner just in time to see the aftermath. He stood beside her, coffee in hand, face unreadable. Ellie didn't look up, didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. Michael took a long sip, then sighed through his nose. "Told you," he said quietly. "He's damaged." Ellie blinked, and something in her chest, not fragile, but furious, tightened like a fist. She turned to him slowly, voice level but cold. "He's not damaged," she whispered. Michael raised an eyebrow. "He's remembering." Silence hung between them. Michael didn't reply, because there was nothing else to say. Not to someone who had just watched trust collapse like a house of cards in a sudden gust. Not to someone who wasn't ready to give up on the pieces. Ellie stayed long after Michael walked away. Bran didn't stop shaking. Not after 10 minutes, not after 30. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak. She just sat, back against the opposite wall, hands in her lap, breathing deep and slow and audible, so he could hear her anchor when his own breath couldn't find its rhythm. And eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, Bran's eyes blinked, just once. The first sign that he'd come back, not fully, not safely, but back. She whispered, "I'm still here," and meant every syllable, because sometimes healing wasn't about moving forward. It was about not running away when everything inside you screamed to do so. That night, as the shelter lights dimmed and the world turned quiet again, Bran stayed curled in his corner. He didn't eat, didn't look at her. But he didn't tear the blanket, didn't bite, didn't bark. He just endured. And Ellie knew that was still something, even if it hurt like hell. The air in the isolation wing felt heavier than usual. Not hot, not stale, just weighty, the kind of weight that settles in the chest after something shatters and no one's brave enough to sweep up the pieces. Bran hadn't moved since yesterday's panic. He lay curled tight in the farthest corner of his kennel, pressed against the wall as if trying to melt into it. His breath still trembled, though slower now, no longer hyperventilating but not calm either. His tail was wrapped like a rope under his legs. Ellie sat exactly where she'd always sat. She hadn't moved either. But this time, it wasn't about progress. It was about not abandoning him when the light dimmed. She had arrived earlier than the staff, before the sun had fully broken over the fogged windows. The hallway was still bathed in muted gray, but Ellie didn't turn on the lights. She didn't want brightness. Not yet. It would feel like a lie. She brought no treats, no toys, no words, only herself. And the silence she'd learned Bran understood better than language. She eased herself down onto the floor with slow, practiced motion, folding her legs and resting her hands gently in her lap. Not facing him directly, not staring, just present. A soft human outline at the edge of his world. The panic had passed, but the echo of it still lived in his posture. In the way his ears tilted, not to listen, but to brace. In the way his back foot twitched at even the faintest sound. But Ellie didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence with pity or promises. She just stayed. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 45. Bran didn't lift his head, didn't move, but she saw it just barely. The slight adjustment of his breathing, less shallow, more rhythmic, not relaxed, but aware. He knew she was there. More importantly, he knew she hadn't left. Most people, after seeing a dog spiral like that, would have tried to fix it, talk them down, offer treats, force affection. But Ellie understood something most people didn't. Some wounds aren't soothed by comfort. They're soothed by consistency. At one point, a staff member poked their head in. "You sure he's worth it?" they said, half joking. Ellie didn't look up, but her answer was steady. "He doesn't need to be worth it. He just needs to know someone will stay." By the third hour, Bran shifted. It was small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. A turn of his head, one eye, just one lifting from his foreleg, and it landed on her. They locked eyes, not for long, not even for full seconds. But it was different this time. Bran didn't look through her. He looked at her. And in that fragile flicker of connection, Ellie saw something she hadn't seen before, not even in the days they'd made progress. Recognition. Not of who she was, but of what she was. A constant. A figure that didn't leave even when he broke again. And for the first time during a panic, Bran saw her stay. Not approach, not retreat, not scold, not soothe, just be. And somehow, that was louder than any voice ever could be. She didn't expect a tail wag, didn't hope for a miracle turnaround. All she wanted was for him to see that someone could witness his pain and not walk away. Because dogs like Bran didn't heal from noise. They healed from silence that doesn't abandon them. As the afternoon light shifted into warmer gold through the tall window panes, Bran finally stretched his front paw slightly forward. Not toward her, not toward food. Just outward. Like he was testing whether the floor would hold him. Ellie didn't move. But inside her chest, something bloomed, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. By closing time, Bran hadn't changed position again. He stayed curled in his corner. But when Ellie rose slowly, carefully, never turning her back, he didn't bolt. He didn't tremble. He watched. And when the door clicked shut behind her, he didn't hide. He stayed facing the gate, as if waiting for tomorrow, because now he had a reason to. Dawn hadn't quite broken. The sky outside was the color of bruised lavender, and the trees surrounding Hope Shelter stood still like silhouettes in mourning. Ellie parked her car without turning off the headlights. For a moment, she sat in the driver's seat, both hands wrapped around a warm travel mug, eyes closed. Today felt different. She couldn't explain why, only that something in her chest whispered, "He's waiting." She moved through the building before anyone else arrived. No greetings, no clipboard, no detours. As she stepped into the hallway of the isolation ward, her pace slowed instinctively. The air here always felt different, heavier, thicker. But this morning it held something else, expectation. And then she saw him, Bran, already at the front of the kennel, not standing, not pacing, just sitting, eyes open, watching. He didn't jump, didn't bark, but he didn't look away either. Not this time. Ellie felt her breath catch, not out of surprise, but reverence, as if acknowledging the holiness of the moment. She approached slowly, careful not to break the quiet they had spent weeks building. When she reached her usual spot, she didn't sit down right away. Instead, she knelt, slowly bringing herself to eye level. Her movements were fluid, intentional. And then, with the gentlest motion, she extended her hand through the lower opening of the kennel bars. Palm up, fingers relaxed, not a treat, not a leash, just a hand. Bran didn't move for a full minute, but he didn't recoil either. His eyes stayed on her fingers, wide, alert, unsure. She didn't speak, didn't breathe too loudly. She waited. Not because she hoped he would come, but because she believed he might. And belief, with dogs like Bran, was more powerful than control. His nose twitched first, a single cautious inhale. Then again, stronger this time. He leaned forward, not much, just a shift in weight, but it was enough for her to see the tension ripple through his shoulders. A part of him still braced for something bad. Another part, curious, wanting. He stepped closer, slow, measured, the way a soldier might approach a door that could be rigged to explode. And then, hesitation. He paused, just short of her fingers, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. His eyes flicked to hers, only for a second. Not asking permission, not asking forgiveness. Just asking, "Is this real?" Ellie didn't blink. She let her eyes stay soft, her hand steady. And then it happened. Bran leaned in, nose first, a brush, a press. The tip of his snout settled gently into her palm, not forced, not out of hunger, just because he chose to. Ellie's chest tightened, not with panic, not with joy, with awe, because for Bran this wasn't just a touch, it was a reclamation of agency, of dignity, of himself. She didn't move her hand to pet him. She didn't speak. She simply let him be there, let him lead. After a moment, Bran pulled back, not with fear, but finality, as if to say, "That's all for now." And Ellie nodded, though no words were exchanged. "I know." That was enough. He stepped back into his space, not all the way to the corner, but to the spot just behind center. He lay down with a slow exhale and kept facing her, watching, breathing, steady. Ellie let her hand fall to her lap, her eyes never leaving his. She whispered, so soft it barely stirred the air between them, "Thank you." In the silence that followed, Bran closed his eyes, not in retreat, but in rest. And Ellie knew The past wasn't erased. The wounds hadn't vanished, but for the first time he had touched without trembling. And more importantly, he had reached. Not because he was asked, not because he was taught, but because he wanted to. Ellie didn't mean to cry. She hadn't even realized the tears had slipped until she tasted salt on her lip. One slow, quiet drop at a time, so still, so gentle, they barely counted as crying at all. But something in her had broken open the moment Bran leaned into her palm. Not shattered, not cracked, just opened, like a rusted door finally easing on old hinges. Bran had pulled back after the touch, but he hadn't turned away. He remained in place, half in shadow, half in the light filtering through the high windows, watching her. Not as a threat, not as a stranger, just watching. Ellie had stayed kneeling, her heart too full for words. Even her breath had gone quiet, as if the moment itself asked her to tread softly. She could still feel the imprint of his snout on her skin, warm, hesitant, real, and then slowly, carefully, she extended her hand again, not to offer, but to connect. Bran didn't retreat. His muscles tightened, yes, but he didn't pull away. His ears twitched. His paw shifted. But he stayed. That alone told her everything she needed to know. She inched forward, not her whole body, just her hand closer this time. Not through the gate, just at its edge, a breath's distance from him, and waited. Bran lowered his head so slow it felt like time was stretching just to hold the space. His eyes flicked to her fingers, then to her face, and back again. Ellie whispered, voice trembling from within, "Can I?" Not because she expected him to answer, but because asking mattered. Bran didn't move, but he didn't run. And that was enough. With all the care in the world, Ellie lifted her fingers and gently brushed the side of his snout. Just once, light as mist, just enough to be felt. Bran flinched. His entire body tensed in a full-body flash like lightning through muscle memory. But he didn't pull away. His eyes didn't close in fear. He simply absorbed the touch, let it land, let it stay, as if he was learning in real time that this wasn't pain, that this was something else, something new, something terrifyingly gentle. "You're safe now," Ellie whispered, her voice raw, cradled in breath and restraint. Bran blinked once, then again, as if trying to understand the meaning behind words he didn't know but somehow felt. Safe, not a command, not a promise, a truth. Ellie let her hand linger for one more second before pulling back, not abruptly, not out of fear, but to respect the moment, to give it room to settle. Bran didn't move. His eyes followed her hand as it rested softly on her knee again. And in that gaze, there was something that hadn't been there before. Not trust, not yet, but the absence of doubt. And that was maybe even more powerful. She wiped a tear with her sleeve, careful not to let the motion disturb him. But Bran didn't react. He simply lowered his head, resting his chin near his paws, still facing her, still watching. His breathing was slow, even. His shoulders no longer curled inward, and for the first time, he didn't look like a dog waiting to be hurt again. He looked like a dog trying to remember how it felt not to be. Ellie leaned against the kennel gate, her hand still warm where his fur had touched it. She closed her eyes and smiled, not wide, Not bright, just enough. Because this quiet, fragile, trembling step wasn't just contact. It was connection. Unspoken, unforced, unbelievably brave. Outside, the morning light had finally broken through the clouds. Soft golden stripes fell across the kennel floor, landing gently on Bran's paws. And he didn't move away. He let the light find him, just as he had let her. Night crept in slowly at Hope Shelter. The halls emptied, lights dimmed. Outside, a low wind whispered through the chain-link fences, rattling like forgotten bones. Inside Kennel 12, Bran lay curled into himself, nose tucked under his chest, limbs drawn tight. From the outside, he looked asleep. But inside his mind, war was raging. The dream came like it always did, without mercy. He was running, his partner shouting something he couldn't make out, static in the comms. The dry sting of dust and gunpowder filled his throat. Then the flash white hot, searing the boom that rattled his spine. Screams, a sharp whistle, the smell of burning fabric. He turned back and saw the eyes, his partner, bleeding, reaching, and Bran, just a heartbeat too late, always too late. He jerked in his sleep, a muffled whimper escaping his throat. One paw twitched violently. His chest rose and fell in frantic bursts, tail thrashing once, then freezing. Gunfire, screams, then silence. The silence always crushed him the most. Bran jolted awake, gasping. He shot up to his feet, body trembling as if his bones were trying to outrun his skin. His breath came in ragged pulses, ears pinned flat, eyes wild and disoriented. The kennel was dark, empty, still. The echo of war faded into the shadows, but the panic clung like a second coat of fur. He backed into the corner, pressed flat against the wall, panting, shaking. He didn't bark. He hadn't in months. Fear had long since learned to be quiet. And then, through the haze of leftover nightmare, he heard it. A breath, soft, human, close. Bran turned his head cautiously, like prey checking for danger. There, outside the kennel gate, curled against the opposite wall, was Ellie. She had fallen asleep sitting up, chin resting on her shoulder, arms wrapped loosely around herself. A folded jacket covered her lap. One hand open, palm upward rested by her knee as if waiting for something, even in sleep. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't left. She had stayed. The air in Bran's chest caught. No one ever stayed. Not when he trembled, not when the past clawed its way out of his sleep. He took a slow, faltering step forward, then another. His paws made no sound against the concrete. He inched toward the gate, then sank down slowly, his body still quivering. Not in the back corner, not under the bench, right by the gate, facing her. His breathing eased, not entirely, but enough. His eyes remained open, watching her chest rise and fall in rhythm with the quiet of night. And for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he wasn't alone after the dream. He blinked slowly. The fear was still there, sitting under his skin like coals that hadn't gone out. But next to it was something else. Something softer. Ellie shifted slightly in her sleep, her palm brushing the cold floor. And without knowing why, Bran scooted closer until the edge of his nose nearly touched the gate, close enough to see her freckles in the moonlight, close enough to believe that maybe the silence didn't mean he had failed. Maybe it just meant it was over. Outside, a distant car drove by. Inside, Bran laid his head down, body pressed to the metal bars that separated him from the only person who hadn't walked away. She had said he was safe now. He didn't know what that meant, but he was starting to believe she might mean it. The morning came soft, filtered through the frost-rimmed windows of Hope Shelter. Pale light pooled on the cement floors, catching motes of dust that danced like ghosts in the air. Ellie arrived before anyone else. Her boots echoed down the empty corridor, slow and sure, the way they always did when she was thinking. Today, though, her steps carried something else, something like anticipation and a pinch of fear. She stopped at Kennel 12. Bran was already awake. He didn't jump up, didn't slink back. He simply lifted his head, ears tilted, eyes watching. Not blank, not vacant. Watching her. "Hey, brave boy," she said quietly, crouching down so her eyes met his. "Today's the day." She didn't bring chicken, didn't carry a leash, just her bare hands, soft breath, and a heart beating fast behind her ribs. Her fingers hovered over the latch. She paused. In the silence, Bran stood up. Not stiffly, not frozen with fear, just steady, waiting. The metal latch clicked. It was the softest sound in the world, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. Ellie opened the door slowly, inch by inch, until it no longer stood between them. Bran didn't move, and neither did she. He looked at the open gate like it was a trap, like freedom had always come with a price. His paw shifted, then stilled. His nose lifted, drawing in her scent, the familiar one. Warm laundry, lavender lotion, something like trust. The air between them trembled. Then, without a sound, Bran stepped forward, one paw out, then another. His chest cleared the doorway. His tail hung low, still, but not tucked. He didn't bolt, didn't panic. He simply walked out. Ellie didn't cry. Not yet. She just let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since the first day she met him. Curled in a corner of that cage, nothing but bones and ghosts. Now, here he was, standing, outside, and the door behind him open. Bran paused beside her. He looked up once, not with fear, not even with full trust, but with something new, consideration. As if asking her, "Now what?" She smiled. "Now we go slow." He blinked, then faced forward again. And together, without fanfare, they walked down the hallway, no leash, no commands, just her presence and his choice. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Because for the first time since he'd been torn from the field, since the day the world decided he was too broken to be worth saving, Bran had stepped forward on his own, and the cage behind him, it wasn't home anymore. The hallway stretched long and dimly lit, a river of silence that curved gently past the rows of kennels. Most were empty this early in the morning. The shelter hadn't yet stirred. Fluorescence flickered softly overhead, humming like a lullaby out of rhythm. Ellie knelt just outside Kennel 12, leash coiled loosely in her hand. Bran stood beside her. No trembling, no retreat, just the subtle rise and fall of his chest as he watched her. She didn't rush. She never did. "All right, partner," she whispered, holding the leash where he could see it. "Only if you're ready." Bran didn't back away. His gaze flicked to the soft nylon strap, then back to her. It wasn't submission in his eyes. It was trust fragile, freshly built, and held together by every quiet moment they had shared. Ellie clipped the leash gently to his collar. It didn't click like a command. It clicked like a question being answered. They moved together, cautiously, slowly out into the main corridor. Bran's steps were unsure at first, his paws scuffed against the smooth floor, nails clicking like a memory he couldn't quite place. His gait was uneven, one rear leg dragging slightly from an old injury that never healed right. But still, he walked, and he stayed close, not because the leash held him there, but because Ellie did. Her presence was enough. He paced beside her, shoulder to thigh, never pulling ahead or falling behind, just in step, just present. Outside the office window, the sun was beginning to crest the far horizon. Light poured in through the dirty glass, brushing gold across Bran's fur and the scuff marks on the shelter floor. In that quiet glow, even his scar softened. Ellie didn't speak. She let the rhythm of their footsteps fill the space. They passed the wall of donor plaques, the supply room with the squeaky hinge, the hallway that always smelled like bleach and memory. Bran paused once beside the door to the intake room. His nose twitched, his ears pressed back slightly. A shadow flickered across his eyes. But Ellie felt the tension through the leash before he flinched and stopped. She turned her body sideways casually, blocking the door from view. "It's just a hallway," she said gently. "Not your past." Bran blinked slowly and moved on. They made it to the end of the corridor where the glass doors let in the full dawn. Ellie stopped there. Bran sat without being told. He looked up at her, not for direction, just to check in. Her eyes shimmered. "You're still choosing me," she whispered. The leash went slack in her hand, and Bran didn't go anywhere. He just sat beside her, still scarred, still healing, still uncertain, but walking, because for the first time in a long time, he believed he had somewhere to walk to. The yard behind the shelter wasn't much, just a fenced square of patchy grass and uneven stones. A lone oak tree hunched near the back, its limbs gnarled like tired arms reaching toward the morning. But to Ellie, it had always felt like sacred ground. Today it felt like earned ground. A pale wool blanket was spread on the dewy grass. Ellie sat cross-legged near one corner, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug still warm with chamomile tea. Steam coiled in the crisp air, curling upward like something exhaled gently from the earth. Beside her, not close enough to touch but close enough to feel, lay Bran. He wasn't leashed. He wasn't commanded. He had followed her out the back door without hesitation, his steps slow but willing. And when she sat, he circled once and lowered his body into a quiet, sphinx-like position just 2 feet away. That was the distance he chose, and she honored it. The morning was wrapped in silence, not the heavy kind that used to settle between them in the early days, but a softer kind. The kind that invited breath, that held space. The sky was shifting from pearl gray to something warmer. Amber spilled across the yard like honey dripping from the edge of the horizon. Birds stirred in the trees beyond the fence, not quite singing, just being. Bran's ears twitched at their movement. He didn't startle. That alone was a victory. Ellie didn't look at him directly. She'd learned that lesson. Sometimes healing happened best in the periphery, when you didn't reach, didn't ask, just allowed. She took a sip of tea and let it warm her chest. Her other hand lay palm up on the blanket. Not offered, not withdrawn, just there. She heard Bran shift, the soft scuff of his paw against the ground, a breath that caught, then released. When she glanced briefly, she saw his body relax. His head was still high, still alert, but his eyes had lost that faraway fog. He wasn't looking at the fence or the sky. He was looking at her, not as a threat, not even as a savior, just as someone who stayed. "I never thought you'd come out here," she murmured, not expecting a response. "But here you are." Bran blinked slowly. His tail didn't wag, but it also didn't tuck. It lay still behind him, relaxed like a ribbon unfurled. A breeze swept across the grass. It carried the faint scent of chamomile, damp earth, and a world that for once wasn't trying to break him. Peace settled like a weightless blanket over them both. It didn't announce itself. It didn't ask permission. It simply arrived in the space between two living beings who had nothing left to prove to each other. Ellie finished her tea in silence. The sun climbed a little higher. A bee droned lazily near the fence, and Bran, scarred and still healing, closed his eyes, not fully asleep, not entirely vulnerable, but resting in the presence of a world that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like a war zone. She didn't reach for him, didn't whisper promises or press closer. She just sat there, mug empty, heart full, with her hand still open on the blanket, in case he ever wanted to close the distance. The records room at Hope Shelter wasn't locked, just forgotten. A narrow hallway behind the laundry unit led to it, walls lined with file cabinets and dust-thick boxes that hadn't been touched in years. Ellie had passed it dozens of times without thinking, but today something pulled her there. Michael had left a stack of folders for her to alphabetize. Most were simple: spay, neuter records, intake reports, vaccinations, routine paperwork for dogs no one remembered long enough to write stories about, until she found the manila file labeled Bran, transfer intake, former K9 unit, stamped not adoptable in bold red ink. Ellie paused. Then she sat down on the floor, legs crossed, the folder trembling slightly in her hands. Inside was a story she never asked to read, but couldn't look away from. Photos first. Black and white, clipped to the top left corner. Bran in uniform, sleek, muscled, a badge clipped to his collar. A handler's gloved hand resting between his shoulders. They looked like a unit bonded, alert, ready. Then came the service record. 8 confirmed finds, 3 apprehensions, 1 bomb alert. Words like loyal, focused, precise scattered throughout the early pages, but they ended abruptly. Ellie turned the next page, and the tone shifted. Incident report, Operation Granite Fold. Date, redacted. Location, undisclosed. Outcome, K9 unit failed to respond to final cue. Handler incapacitated. Subsequent explosion resulted in casualties. Dog recovered at scene in unresponsive state. Psych eval notes. Displays signs of shock, disassociation, no hostile behavior but no engagement either. Refuses to eat, avoids eye contact, inconsolable. Recommendation, immediate decommission. Status, unfit for future duty. Disposition, to be transferred, no further investment advised. And at the bottom, a single line circled in pen. Aggression, inconsolable, unsalvageable. Ellie covered her mouth with the back of her hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Not because the words were cruel, but because she knew they had never seen him. They had seen a weapon misfire, a tool malfunction, a soldier fall short. But she had seen the dog who flinched at slammed doors, the eyes that watched her silently from the corner, not with rage, but with a question no one had ever stayed long enough to answer. Am I still worth saving? She wiped her face and turned the page. There was one last form unsigned. A printed evaluation from a state-sponsored shelter he'd briefly passed through before being sold. Extensive trauma indicators. Avoidant behavior. No demonstrated capacity for reconditioning. No value. Rehome not recommended. It ended with a box checked in ink. Destination. Private transfer. Non-gov. And a hand-scrawled note next to it. Takes up space. Let someone else deal with it. Ellie pressed her hand to her chest. The ache bloomed behind her ribs, deep, ancient, furious. They hadn't failed at Bran. They'd failed Bran. She closed the file slowly, hands trembling. Through the window, the sun was rising, just like it had the day he first stepped out of his cage beside her. He was never broken. They just stopped waiting long enough to see he could heal. And now, he had someone who would never stop. The shelter was still. Most nights, by this hour, the dogs had settled into soft breathing and dreams stitched from scent and memory. But not Bran. Tonight, he paced. Not in circles, but back and forth, like something inside him was too loud to let him lie down. Ellie watched from the cot she'd unfolded just outside his enclosure. She wasn't supposed to be here. But Michael had stopped questioning her presence long ago. And Bran, he never barked at her anymore. That alone was permission enough. Then suddenly, he dropped. Not like resting, like falling. His legs gave out beneath him, and his chest hit the floor with a soft thud. The air left his lungs in a shudder. It began small, a whimper, barely audible, then a jolt in his right hind leg, then both. His paws began to twitch violently, his body tensed, his head thrashed once, then twice. His breathing came ragged, too fast, too shallow. Ellie was through the gate before she even realized she'd moved. Her heart raced, but her voice stayed low. Bran, it's okay. You're safe. I'm here. He didn't hear her. His eyes were open but lost, trapped behind something no one could reach. Some memory still clawing at the back of his mind teeth. Smoke, blood. A handler who never came back. A blast. A silence that followed and never truly ended. Ellie knelt beside him. Her hand hovered just above his shoulder. She didn't want to startle him, didn't want to break whatever fragile thread was keeping him tethered to now. But he was spiraling, and sometimes presence was the only rope you had left. So she touched him, not roughly, not urgently, just enough. Her palm found his chest right over his heart, and then she laid down beside him. The floor was cold, but Bran was colder. His whole body trembled not from chill, but from something deeper. Ellie pressed herself lightly against his side, one arm wrapped around him, her cheek to his fur. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. Again. "It wasn't your fault." Over and over, soft like a lullaby, firm like a truth he had never been allowed to hear. Her voice didn't reach his mind, but her heartbeat did. Steady. Constant. A sound that spoke a language older than commands or comfort phrases. It told him, "You are not alone." It told him, "I am still here." And slowly, minute by minute, his body stopped jerking. His paws relaxed. The breaths came deeper. His head dropped into the crook of her neck, and his eyes finally closed, not in fear, but in exhaustion. Ellie stayed like that for hours, even after he stilled, even after her arm went numb. She stayed, not to fix, not to heal, not to save, but to simply share the weight, because sometimes healing didn't come in leaps. It came in the quiet, when someone finally stayed through the storm. The morning was quiet. A pale sun filtered through the shelter's east windows, casting thin beams of gold across the concrete floor. The hallway outside Bran's kennel echoed only with the soft clicks of Ellie's footsteps, measured and unhurried. In her hand, she held something small, a rectangle of brushed metal the size of a playing card attached to a loop of twine. The tag was simple, but not plain. She'd spent the evening designing it. While Bran finally slept without flinching, she had sat at the old desk in the corner of the admin room, writing and rewriting the words. Not for anyone else, just for him. She wanted to give him back something no file or handler or mission report had ever truly offered. His identity. Not the job, not the scars. Just him. As she approached his kennel, Bran stirred. He didn't startle, didn't bolt, just lifted his head from the corner blanket and blinked once, slow and cautious. Ellie smiled softly. "Good morning, partner." She crouched down in front of the kennel gate and carefully tied the tag onto the chain-link door. The metal caught the light, and for a moment it shimmered. Bran, retired K9, safe, loved, no ranks, no warnings, no red stamps, no declarations of what he couldn't be, just a name and a truth. Ellie sat back cross-legged on the floor, not watching him, watching the tag sway gently in the air. She didn't need him to understand the words. She just needed him to see someone had cared enough to write them. He patted closer, slow and tentative. His eyes landed on the tag for a second, then drifted to her, and stayed there. "I read your file," she whispered. "I saw what they called you, what they said you couldn't be." Her throat caught for a moment. "But they never saw this. You. They never waited long enough to know." Bran tilted his head just slightly, and in that tilt was something that hadn't lived in him for a long time. Curiosity. Not fear, not readiness to obey. Just curiosity. Ellie smiled through the knot in her chest. She didn't reach for him this time. She just stayed. And the tag, light as it was, seemed to carry the weight of years as it swung in the stillness. A dog once forgotten, now claimed, not by an agency, not by a handler, but by someone who chose him, not for what he did, but for who he was, Bran. The bell above the front door of Hope Shelter gave its usual soft jingle. It wasn't loud. Nothing in this place was. But it was enough to make Ellie glance up from the intake chart she was updating behind the counter. Her pen paused mid-stroke. They were older, mid-50s maybe. The kind of couple who wore warmth like an old sweater. The man had a calm stillness in his shoulders. The woman carried a tote bag full of papers and a thermos of something that smelled faintly like cinnamon. "Hi," she said, stepping forward. "We called yesterday. We're looking to adopt." Michael greeted them first. Ellie stayed quiet, watching from behind the desk. She didn't want to assume. Lots of people walked in with gentle smiles and soft voices, then turned sharp at the mention of special needs dogs. But then the woman said something that made Ellie stand. "We saw the tag, the one on his kennel, Bran, the retired K9. Ellie came around the desk slowly. "That's right," she said cautiously. "He's here, still recovering, still learning trust again." The man nodded once. No questions yet, no judgment, just listening. Ellie exhaled. "I should tell you now," she continued. "He's not like the others. He doesn't play. He flinches at loud noises. He doesn't like raised voices or sudden movements. And sometimes he just stares off, like he's somewhere else." The woman's smile didn't falter. "We're not looking for a dog to entertain us," she said gently. "We're looking for a soul that needs a soft place to land." Those words, simple as they were, hit Ellie like a warm breeze through a cracked window. She led them toward the back wing. Each step stirred a quiet ache in her chest she hadn't anticipated. Bran's section was quieter now. He no longer barked, didn't whimper at night. But there was a stillness to him that hadn't quite lifted, like a man who'd returned from war but hadn't unpacked his bags. As they approached, Ellie slowed. "You don't have to go in. You can just observe. He's particular about strangers." The couple nodded again, not a flicker of offense. Bran was lying near the gate. His ears perked slightly at the sound of her voice, but he didn't rise. The man crouched at a distance, said nothing. The woman sat on the floor, mirroring Ellie's exact posture the day she first met him. And then, softly, she whispered, "Hi there, Bran. We don't expect anything. We're just here." Minutes passed. Bran didn't approach, but he didn't retreat either. He watched, measured, quiet. The man didn't reach for him. The woman didn't coo or wave treats. They just waited. And Bran, slowly, quietly tilted his head. That was it. But Ellie noticed. She always did. It wasn't interest. Not yet. But it wasn't rejection either. It was the first brick of a bridge. Later, as the couple stood to leave, the woman turned to Ellie. "We don't want to rush anything," she said, "but if it's all right, we'd like to come back tomorrow, just to sit, just to let him get used to us." Ellie nodded, trying to keep her voice even. "I think he'd like that." She didn't know if Bran would ever leave this place, but for the first time someone had seen him not as broken, not as a risk, but as a life worth waiting for. The second visit came at the quietest hour of the shelter, just after morning cleaning, just before the routine of feedings and walks began. The sun filtered through the high windows in muted amber tones, casting long bars of light across the concrete floor. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Ellie led the couple back, slow and measured. Every step felt like a reckoning. Bran was awake, sitting up this time. That alone made her heart skip. He'd been sleeping more peacefully lately. Less whimpering in the night, fewer startled awakenings. But change, even gentle change, had always carried a weight with him. Today would test it. The moment the man spoke, just a soft, "Hey, buddy." Bran jerked back. Not far, not frantic, but startled. The old reflexes came alive again, ears pinned, legs tense, body halfway into retreat. Ellie dropped to her knees beside him without a word, and Bran stopped. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't run to her, didn't nuzzle into her shoulder, but his breathing slowed. The white-rimmed panic in his eyes faded, just enough for the moment to hold. "It's okay," Ellie whispered, more to the space between them than the dog himself. She didn't pet him, didn't give a treat. Just let him anchor himself in her steadiness. Across from them, the The couple waited. No motion, no sound. They were learning faster than most that love for a dog like Bran wasn't given in toys or calls of affection. It was given in stillness, in presence, in restraint. And that's when the woman did something Ellie hadn't expected. She slowly reached out, not toward Bran, but toward the ground between them. She opened her palm, flat and patient, not luring, just offering. Bran's ears twitched, then his nose. He stayed still for a long moment, as if measuring the risk of that invisible distance between intention and consequence. And then, carefully, he leaned forward. One sniff, cautious, trembling, a ghost of his old training layered beneath years of neglect. His nose grazed the woman's palm. She didn't move, didn't speak, and that somehow was the greatest kindness. Ellie felt her breath catch. She had spent weeks on the floor outside Bran's cage, waiting for something just like this, a gesture not of trust, but of possibility. The man, still seated, smiled so faintly it could have been mistaken for breath. "I can wait a lifetime for that," he said. It wasn't pride in his voice. It was reverence. After a few more minutes, Bran stepped back, not because he was afraid, but because he'd given all he had to give for the day. Ellie looked down at him. "He did it on his terms," she said softly. The woman nodded, voice barely audible. "That's the only way it should ever be." As they left that day, the man turned back at the hallway's bend. Bran was still watching them, not wagging, not walking forward, but watching. And for a dog who once learned that looking at people meant punishment, that gaze was everything. The door clicked shut behind the couple, their footsteps softening into silence down the hallway. Ellie stood still for a long time, one hand resting lightly on the latch of Bran's kennel. The air was hushed, like the shelter itself was trying not to disturb whatever unspoken decision had just been made. She turned to him. Bran hadn't moved. He sat exactly where he had been since the visitors left, eyes trained not on the door but on her. Not stiff, not startled, just present. Something in that gaze held weight, not fear, not longing, something quieter, something that felt like staying. Ellie lowered herself slowly to the floor beside the open kennel gate, her knees brushing the edge of his blanket. "You know," she said, her voice soft with tired affection, "you could have gone with them." Bran blinked, didn't look away, didn't lie down either. He simply turned his head a little and, without prompt or reward, scooted his body closer. It was not dramatic, not sudden, just a quiet, deliberate shift, until his side touched hers, and there it was. The choice. Ellie felt it like an exhale through her entire being. Not relief, not victory, just the deep, soul-level recognition that this scarred, broken creature, once discarded, once forgotten, had made a decision not based on training or command, but trust. His body trembled once and steadied again. He was still Bran, hesitant, battered, quieter than most dogs would ever be. But in that closeness, he was also something else. Willing. The open door creaked gently as a breeze from the hall stirred it, reminding them both that freedom, real freedom, was just a step away. But Bran didn't take it. Instead, he leaned in, nudging his shoulder against Ellie's leg. Ellie's throat tightened. She looked down at him, eyes glassy. "Okay, then," she whispered. brushing a hand gently through the scruff of his neck. "You've already chosen." She didn't close the kennel door, didn't move to fetch treats or toys or a leash. She just sat there with him, two quiet figures inside a space that had once been a prison and was now something else entirely. A pause, a possibility, a place to stay just a little longer. Outside, the shelter buzzed faintly back to life. But inside this corner, time folded in on itself. Later, when Michael passed by, he slowed at the sight of them. Ellie didn't speak. She only glanced up and nodded once toward Bran, still pressed lightly against her, and Michael, for all his practicality, said nothing, just walked on. Some things didn't need documenting. Some things were never meant for the intake log or the adoption report. Some things, like what Bran had chosen, just were. It started with the shift in air. Ellie was wiping down feeding bowls when the light dimmed outside the windows, casting long gray shadows across the shelter floor. A gust of wind curled through the hallway, rattling the door frames. And then, crack! The sky split open with a violent snarl of thunder. A second later, Bran was gone. Ellie turned toward his usual spot near the office door and found nothing but an abandoned blanket still warm. She felt her chest tighten. Another crash, louder, closer. She knew this wasn't just weather not for him. She found him in the far corner of the indoor yard, wedged beneath the wooden bench like a ghost trying to disappear. His body curled tightly in on itself, trembling so violently she thought for one terrifying second that he was seizing. He didn't look at her, didn't make a sound, didn't seem to recognize the world around him at all, just shook as if the storm outside was replaying one inside his mind. Ellie knelt slowly, lowering herself onto the concrete floor a few feet away. She didn't speak, didn't call his name. Only let the silence fill the space between them, broken only by the ragged sound of Bran's shallow breath and the occasional guttural boom of thunder. She folded her legs beneath her, placed both hands palm down on the floor beside her knees, and simply waited. Minutes passed, then more. Her jeans soaked through from the chill of the floor, but she didn't move. Rain began to tap against the high windows. A dog in a distant kennel barked, once nervous, confused. But Bran didn't flinch at that. It was the thunder. Always the thunder. Ellie knew the file by heart now. K9 Bran, final mission. IED detonation. Partner wounded. Unresponsive for 43 minutes post-blast. His trauma wasn't just noise, it was memory. The kind that branded itself into muscle, into breath, into reflex. Another rumble rolled through the shelter and Bran's back legs twitched. He pressed himself harder into the bench's underside until there was barely space for him to breathe. Ellie exhaled slowly. Then, as gently as she could, she leaned a little closer. Still no words, just presence. That was what had started this healing, and it had to be what saved it again. She reached out, not toward him, but beside him, letting her hand rest on the cool floor, fingers stretched just within his line of sight. An offering, not a command. And she waited. It felt like an hour, but then a shift, a pause in his trembling. And Bran, still shaking, still small, blinked once, then moved, barely. He didn't crawl toward her. He just uncurled enough for his paw to slide an inch closer, and Ellie did something she hadn't done since the day he touched her hand for the first time. She cried. Not from frustration, not from fear, but because even in the middle of his storm, Bran had reached, and that meant he hadn't gone completely. The thunder rolled on, but this time it didn't take him all the way under, because she was still there. And in his fractured, scared, half-healed mind, something inside him knew. She stayed. The crate door creaked open before sunrise. Ellie had spent the night preparing towels in the back seat, a worn blanket that smelled like Bran, a quiet playlist looping soft guitar chords. But still, as she knelt beside his kennel with the leash gently coiled in her palm, her chest tightened. Today wouldn't be easy. Bran stood near the back wall, tail tucked, eyes already wide with apprehension. He knew something was different. He felt it in the way the air shifted, the way Ellie's smile was a little more practiced. And most of all, he saw the car. The same kind of car that once took him away. "Hey, buddy," Ellie whispered, kneeling just outside his space. "We're just going for a ride. I'll be with you the whole time." She clipped the leash gently. Bran didn't resist. But he didn't step forward either. His legs locked as they reached the door, nails skittering across the tile. Ellie waited, patient. No tugging, no coaxing, just a quiet presence. And then, slowly, Bran allowed himself to be lifted, body tense as a coiled spring, but trusting. That trust, Ellie thought, weighed more than anything she carried. The car ride was quiet, except for the hum of tires and Bran's shallow panting. He didn't bark, didn't cry, but his body told the story. He sat curled tightly in the back seat, pressed against the door like gravity was trying to pull him away from her. His eyes flicked to the windows, the floor, the roof, never settling. And Ellie, she kept one hand on the back seat, palm facing him, not forcing touch, only offering it. 10 minutes into the drive, Bran's paw slid forward, 1 inch, then another, until his toes brushed her fingertips. She didn't say a word, but her breath hitched, because in all his fear, he still reached for her. At the clinic, the sterile smell made Bran freeze. Ellie opened the door slowly. His nails hit the pavement, and for a second he backed up, shoulders tight, legs shaking. "It's okay," Ellie whispered. "We'll go slow." He let her guide him, not with pressure, but with presence. Inside, the waiting room was mercifully empty. A receptionist behind the desk raised an eyebrow as Bran entered, eyeing his stiff posture and the deep scars lining his back leg. "New intake?" she asked. "Retired K9," Ellie replied softly. "Just retired hard." The vet came out 10 minutes later, a short man with kind eyes and a voice like warm tea. "You must be Bran." Bran didn't growl, didn't cower, but he shook from ears to tail as the vet knelt in front of him. "It's all right, soldier," the vet murmured. "We're just here to help." And then the vet reached out. Not at Bran's face, but toward his shoulder, open palm slow. Bran flinched, but didn't snap, didn't run, didn't bare his teeth. He let the man touch him. That, Ellie knew, was a victory. The exam went slowly. Heart check, reflex test, vaccination. Bran's entire body trembled with every new tool, every unfamiliar hand. But he let it happen. He never lashed out, not once. And when the final shot was done and Bran lay curled beside Ellie's feet, the vet glanced up, gently brushing his stethoscope away, and said the words that made her eyes burn. "He's not aggressive. He's not broken. He's gentle, just scared." On the way home, Bran didn't press against the door. He curled next to the blanket Ellie brought, and somewhere between the first turn and the last traffic light, he laid his head in her lap. Ellie didn't speak. She just reached one hand down, resting it on his shoulder. Her touch said, what words never could, I know you're scared, but you did it, and I'm proud of you. The air was different that evening. Not lighter, not louder, just still. The shelter was quiet now, long after the last adoption form had been filed. The lights dimmed, and the volunteers gone. Only the hum of the old ceiling vent and the rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock remained. Ellie sat cross-legged in the staff lounge, her back against the wall, a half-finished cup of chamomile tea resting beside her. She hadn't planned to stay late, but something in her gut, something she'd come to trust almost as much as her heart told her to wait. Bran had been uncharacteristically quiet since the vet trip, not withdrawn, just thoughtful, if a dog could be. He hadn't bolted to the far end of the kennel when they returned. He hadn't needed coaxing. He simply walked beside her, step by step, not from command, from trust. And now he stood in the doorway, not pacing, not panting, just watching her. Ellie didn't speak. She didn't reach for him. She simply stayed still, letting the weight of the day settle into the floor beneath her, breathing slow and even. Bran stepped forward. No leash, no urgency, just choice. His steps were soft, almost hesitant, like someone walking through a memory. His nails clicked lightly on the tile, then fell silent against the worn rug near her feet. Ellie held her breath without realizing it, unsure what he was choosing, distance or closeness. Then, without a sound, Bran lowered himself, curled slowly. His ribs expanded with a deep sigh. And for the first time since the day he was caged and forgotten, he laid down at someone's feet, not under a desk in fear, not in a corner with his back to the world, but at peace. Ellie blinked hard, her throat tightening as she watched his eyelids grow heavy. His body, always tight like a wire wound too far, began to melt into the floor. One paw twitched, then the other. His breath slowed. He was sleeping, right there, against her boot. A nap, not out of exhaustion, but safety. No more kennel bars, no more shouted commands, no more waiting for pain, just the quiet of a room, the warmth of someone who stayed, and the simple act of choosing presence. Ellie didn't move. Her tea went cold beside her, but she didn't care. She sat there for over an hour, afraid even a shift in weight would wake him. Every now and then she'd glance down at the shape of him, scarred, aging, still trembling in dreams. But there, alive, healing, and hers. Somewhere deep in the night, Bran's paw reached out, resting gently atop her shoe. No pressure, just contact. A silent reminder. I know you're here, and I'm still choosing to stay. The folding chairs were mismatched. The banner overhead, slightly crooked red in peeling gold letters. Service never forgotten, honoring our K-9 heroes. It wasn't glamorous. No news vans, no red carpet. Just a gathering of shelter staff, a few local veterans, and a small line of retired dogs in faded vests, some with gray around their muzzles, others with limbs that didn't move quite right anymore. And in the middle of it all, Bran. Ellie stood beside him, fingers resting gently on the leash, though they both knew by now it was mostly for show. She'd almost said no when Michael told her Bran had been invited. Too loud, too many people, too many chances for fear to spiral. But when she crouched beside Bran that morning and whispered, "Do you want to come with me?" He didn't look away. He simply stood. So now, here they were. The applause started before they even reached the front. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, just human. Real. Palms clapping together in slow rhythm. People clapped for the dogs, for their stories, for the battles fought in silence and on four legs. Bran didn't flinch. His ears twitched at the sound, but his posture held, shoulders slightly back, stance steady, like a soldier remembering his training not through command, but through instinct. Ellie stole a glance down at him. He was standing tall, not perfectly straight, not like the first day he ever sat at attention in uniform, but taller than she'd ever seen him. Taller than the broken shadow she first met in that trembling corner of the kennel. His tail didn't tuck. His eyes didn't dart. He faced the world just this once. The MC, a local officer with a slight limp and a soft voice, began to read names. Some were accompanied by photos of dogs long past. Others received gentle pats and medals hung loosely over collars. When Bran's name came up, there was a pause. Bran, retired K-9, years of silent service, survivorship beyond words. Ellie felt her throat close. A shelter staffer came forward with a small tag on a ribbon nothing fancy, but the letters gleamed. Still worthy. The woman hesitated as she reached down, unsure if Bran would let her close. Ellie waited to intervene, but Bran took a step forward. One, then two. He sniffed the woman's hand and let her place the ribbon gently around his neck. The applause returned, louder now. And this time, Ellie didn't care if Bran panicked. But he didn't. He stood still. Let it happen. Let it mean something. Afterward, as people moved about, chatting, taking pictures, Ellie led him toward a quieter corner of the yard. The tension in her shoulders hadn't yet left. She'd been holding her breath all morning. But Bran turned to her, and in a moment that felt too simple to capture, he pressed his head into her side, soft, slow, solid. Like he knew what had just happened. Like he understood that today wasn't about awards. It was about return. Ellie knelt, whispered against his ear, "You did it, Bran." And for the first time in his life, in front of a crowd, he closed his eyes and let her hold him. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, not loud, just enough to fill the quiet with warmth instead of silence. Shadows flickered across the wooden walls of Ellie's small cottage, dancing on framed photos, half-finished dog sketches, and a worn leash now hanging like an old medal by the door. Bran lay curled on the rug, inches from the fire. No crate, no leash, no collar, only the soft rhythm of breath, the slow rise and fall of a chest that had once known only alertness, readiness, fear. Ellie sat beside him, legs tucked beneath her, cradling a mug of chamomile that had long gone cold. She didn't drink. She just sat, watching him. Bran's eyes were open, but just barely, like he was waiting for something, a command, a cue, a signal to return to who he once had to be. She reached down, not to pet, not to praise, but simply to be near. And softly, barely louder than the flames, she whispered, "You're off duty now, Bran." The words lingered in the space between them. Not ceremonial, not for show, just truth. She let them sit, let them settle the way trust had once taken weeks to build. And then, gently, she placed her hand on the top of his head. No pressure, no intent. "No one needs you to be perfect anymore," she said. Her voice trembled, not because she doubted it, but because saying it out loud made it real, final, freeing. For a moment he didn't move. The weight of his old world still hung in his bones. the world of orders and ranks, of cages, of panic every time a bootstep came too fast, of flinching first and asking later. But something in her tone broke through, something in the firelight, in the way she didn't reach for him like a handler but simply stayed like a friend. Bran let out a breath, not a sigh, a surrender, and slowly he shifted, 1 inch, then another, until his head rested on her lap. Ellie's hand moved instinctively to his fur gentle strokes. No rhythm, just presence. His coat was coarse in places, patchy where trauma had rooted, but it was warm now, real. He blinked once, then again, and then his eyes closed completely, not with alertness, tucked behind the lids, but with trust. A dog that had waited years to feel safe enough to sleep like this. Not behind bars, not beside fear, but here, with her. Outside, the world rolled on. The wind picked at the trees, and the night whispered like it always had. But inside that room, time stilled, not because of anything loud, not because of some heroic gesture, but because a dog who had once known only service, only silence, had been given something rare, permission to stop. Ellie watched the firelight dance across his face, her fingers brushing gently behind his ear. A scar there pulsed, faintly reminder of a life he no longer had to live. "You're home now," she whispered again. Then quieter. "You don't have to save anyone tonight." Bran didn't move, didn't twitch, just breathed, just was. And for the first time in both their lives, that was enough. Morning came softly, no sirens, no shouts. Just the pale gold of sunlight dripping through the curtain slats, spreading like warmth across the shelter floor. The hallway was quiet. No footsteps yet. Just the hum of early light and the scent of old cedar and fresh mop water. Michael walked past the kennels on his morning check, steaming cup of coffee in hand, thinking about nothing in particular until he stopped. Bran's kennel was open, but not in the way he expected. No broken latch, no mess, no panic, just empty. Michael's brows furrowed for a second, a flicker of alarm rising in his chest. But before he could call out, he saw it. At the far end of the corridor by the front door, tail low, posture calm, stood Bran. Not pacing, not cowering, just waiting. Ellie rounded the corner behind Michael, a yawn still on her lips and a leash coiled loosely in her hand. Her eyes followed Michael's, and then she saw him. There. Not behind the bars anymore, not hiding in the corners of his own world, but standing, truly standing, like a dog who had chosen to walk toward something instead of away from everything. Her heart thudded quietly, not from shock, but from something older, something sacred. "Hey, Bran," she whispered, as if a whisper could honor the moment more than a shout ever could. He didn't flinch, didn't check for exits, didn't need her to coax him. Instead, Bran did something he had never done, not even when he wore a badge, not even when he'd been trained to charge into chaos. He stepped forward, one paw, then the other, and he walked to her. Tail swayed once, ears half lowered in comfort, eyes soft, not vacant, not watchful, but at ease. When he reached her, he didn't sit or wait for a treat. He leaned, just leaned. His shoulder against her shin, head tucked beside her hip, like it had always belonged there. Michael stood in stunned silence. "I'll be damned." Ellie didn't respond. She didn't need to. because this wasn't a moment for anyone else to label or frame. This was Bran's, and Bran had chosen. She didn't clip the leash, didn't tell him what to do. Instead, she opened the front door to the early day. The breeze rolled in, carrying the scent of wet grass, traffic beyond the trees, and something more. Hope, maybe. Bran sniffed the air. No panic, no bracing. He stepped out into the sun, not like a soldier reporting for duty, but like a soul reclaiming its place in the world. Behind them, the empty kennel caught the light. Its door hung open, not broken, not forgotten, just no longer needed. That was the day he stepped forward. And for Bran, it wasn't just a walk. It was a beginning, a silent vow in paw steps. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm here. I'm home. In a world that often measures worth by obedience, performance, or pedigree, Bran's story reminds us of something deeper. The quiet resilience of a broken spirit and the miracle of healing when someone simply stays. German Shepherds are known for their strength, loyalty, and courage, but it is their ability to love again after being shattered that defines their true heroism. Bran didn't just recover. He rediscovered himself. Not because someone forced him to, but because someone believed in him without asking anything in return. For every dog labeled too damaged, there's a story waiting to be rewritten with patience, presence, and love. And for every person like Ellie who chooses to sit in the silence, who sees beyond the scars, there's a legacy of quiet redemption. This story isn't just about a dog once left behind. It's about second chances, about healing without words, and about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. Let it be a reminder, behind every fearful glance or trembling paw, there may live a heart ready to trust again, if only we give it time. Because love doesn't bark, it waits, and then it walks beside you, quietly, forever.